The doctor and Romana groggily picked themselves up from where they lay on the floor of the crashed weather hut. Beyond a slight tilt to that surface towards the door through which they had entered, there was remarkably few signs of damage to this bizarre mobile home. The jungle canopy had slowed the final few meters of its descent, and its landing had been further softened by the moist peaty humus of the forest floor. The absence of any loose items in the room they now occupied had reduced any signs of the crash to near invisibility. The doctor and Romana's bruises and scrapes were, while undeniably painful and nagging, almost the only scant evidence of any real harm or trauma. Almost. AC remained lying on the cabin deck. His two lower limbs had unnatural bends upon their lower joints. His hide was actually broken at the points of discontinuity. Thick yellow ooze slowly seeped out from these cracks. Both AC's legs were broken. AC whimpered and moaned to himself, barely conscious.
"How bad is it, Doctor?"
Romana asked. The doctor shook his head, a little dazed and unsure of himself. "It is difficult to judge the seriousness of his injuries. The chittids are notoriously sensitive to physical harm and somewhat nervy in the face of peril or distress. And, to be honest, I just don't know enough about their physiology to give a meaningful prognosis." AC's giant eye had until then been closed, either in response to the pain or through some degree of unconsciousness. In a Herculean effort, by chittid standards, he forced himself to speak.
"On the far right of the control panel, there is a button. Medibed."
He struggled out. Quickly, the doctor rushed over to that panel. After a moment's search, he found the switch and pressed it. The, until now hidden, Medibed chamber slid out from the same wall and nearly knocked the doctor off his feet as he nimbly hopped aside. The hexagonal cross-section chest-like bed stopped when fully extended, being perhaps half a metre longer than the height of the doctor. After a further hurried examination, he discovered the opening mechanism. The entire top half of the unit swung open from a hinge attaching it lengthways to the bottom half, this top being some transparent perspex-like material, while the bottom was chrome-coloured and opaque.
"Put me inside,"
AC croaked feebly. As gently and carefully as they could, Romana and the doctor lifted the injured alien and placed him softly on the cushioned interior of the medibed. To the doctor's mind, it was unpleasantly reminiscent of a coffin.
"Close the chamber,"
AC told them softly. Romana found the appropriate control and activated it. The lid eased down with an almost imperceptible hum. As soon as the lid closed, there was a brief faint hissing sound.
"Oh, thank goodness for that!"
AC's shrill voice rang out from the cabinet, sounding not only more normal in strength and tone, but also slightly amplified, almost as if the medibed had built-in speakers. "AC," the doctor said, still worried. "Is everything okay in there? Are you all right?"
"Oh yes, Doctor, I'm perfectly okay. More than okay."
The chittid's response sounded almost too okay, bordering on giddy.
"The automatic anesthetic has been administered, and now the device can begin repairs. I feel fine."
The doctor and Romana exchanged knowing glances, but also smiled with relief.
"Will we be able to continue our journey?"
Romana asked, once more focused on the purpose of their aborted flight. AC tapped a few buttons on the inside of the medibed with his upper claws. Through the perspex lid, they saw his face cloud, the first darkening of his mood since the anesthetic.
"The ship can repair me in a couple of hours. As for itself, it seems that is beyond its powers to remedy. You must go on foot to find my friend Bimbo in his official residence, not only to see for yourself the harm the Earthmen are causing, but now with the additional purpose of requesting his aid to recover and repair my home."
The doctor nodded his understanding. "Wise words indeed, my good friend," he acknowledged, before glancing down at his feet. "Although I do so wish I still had both my boots. No matter, I shall tough it out." Then another thought struck him. "But where exactly is the home of your friend Bimbo the Boloid?" AC tapped a few more buttons on the inside of the medibed.
"Bimbo's mining settlement lies 3 kilometers south of here. Tell him you are a friend of mine and explain the purpose of our visit. He will certainly welcome you with open arms."
"Won't that mean he'll fall over?" the doctor whispered behind his hand to Romana. She sniggered as she remembered the strange furry sphere of the one boloid they had seen so far, with its single pair of dual-purpose arms or legs. "And how will we find him exactly?" the doctor asked in a more audible and serious tone. AC nodded vigorously from his prone position.
"I have the exact coordinates here and can broadcast them in a variety of ways if you have a suitable device."
The doctor nodded with a slight air of weary resignation. "I believe I may have something which will do the trick." With that, he withdrew his sonic screwdriver and the information was transferred. Before the Time Lords left, AC had one final piece of advice.
"Be careful in the jungle. While most of the wildlife is relatively safe, there are a few more troublesome creatures out there. Keep your eyes open for the vicious snarks and the whiloming vooms. You definitely don't want one of them landing on you."
The doctor nodded his thanks to his old friend. "And you keep the door shut after we leave," the doctor retorted. "We'd hate for you to be eaten in our absence." The only reply they received was a single nervous gulp. AC's home safely secured behind them, the doctor and Romana headed off south through the moist, dense jungle. The vines and trees which surrounded them came in a wide variety of colours, many beyond those found in the plants of Earth or Gallifrey. There were also odd towering columns or elongated cones of rubbery texture, possibly a fungus of some sort, but ones which were often taller than mature conifers. These too came in a variety of strange shades, from purples through greens to even a sickly white. The doctor frequently checked his sonic screwdriver as he made his uneven squelching progress through the foliage. His one shod foot was faring well enough. It was the other, wrapped only in a sock, which was becoming uncomfortable. While it had merely become dusty as they ran through the streets of City Alpha 1, here in the jungle it was utterly soaked and muddy as it sank into the dank humus with every step. Romana would occasionally smirk at her companion's discomfort, although she made some effort to hide this. To be fair, much of the time she was too preoccupied to smirk, as she kept her eyes peeled for the aforementioned snarks and vooms, in spite of, unfortunately, being utterly unfamiliar with how they looked. The doctor had just made yet another check on the screwdriver and pocketed it when he gasped. Romana had overtaken him and was a pace ahead, peering around them. The doctor was looking upwards over their heads. He grabbed Romana by the shoulders and pulled them both back a step or two. This rescue had only just been made in time. A generous pile of guano landed directly in front of them, so close a few chunks still managed to splatter their trousers a little.
"What on Gallifrey was that?"
Romana exclaimed with disgust. The doctor released her right shoulder and pointed past her head upwards into the forest canopy. "Behold, a city of the chirpers!" Romana saw the tree-born conurbation for the first time. She felt both his grandiose title and the label he had used were somewhat unearned.
"City,"
she repeated dubiously, nodding to the elevated dwellings. All these structures were built on the broadest of the branches, or on platforms between narrower boughs, and as such, while well above the heads of the two Time Lords, tended to cluster around the lower reaches of the jungle canopy. Their methods and materials of construction were considerably lower tech than the glass, concrete and chrome of the chitted civilization. Everything was formed from logs, branches, vines and leaves, the jungle itself further repurposed. The cut limbs were mostly cleaned and prepared to give something closer to treated wood. Upon reflection, mostly might have been an exaggeration. It was not just this treatment of the timber which had a somewhat half-hearted look to it. Every building looked semi-completed, and yet also bore signs of long use, wear and tear, and even neglect. Here a shack-like home would be missing a wall. Another had only half a roof. Yet another had no roof at all. One or two were simply exposed platforms, as if they had progressed to the foundation and got no further. In all cases, it was as though the architect had got distracted, lost focus, and consequently the will or desire to follow through. The fragmentary nature of these dwellings made it particularly easy to observe their occupants. The Doctor and Romana realized they were being scrutinized in return. There was quite a crowd on the branch over their heads, a large broad bough to be sure, but it was not only its size which allowed it to support such a large number of observers. The chirpers were no more than 1 metre tall. The Time Lords realized that this size was reflected in the somewhat ramshackle buildings of the city, perfect for their builders, but the Doctor and Romana would have been hard-pressed to fit inside any one of them, except those with the handy missing walls or roofs. Size aside, the chirpers were the most humanoid-looking denizens of Alpha Centauri Prime so far encountered. Their skin tones varied through pallid pinks to dusty tans, their hair enjoying a similar range of shades, although some sported more jungle green or blue locks. There was something very samey about their features. It was not so much that they were all identical, but from a human or Gallifreyan perspective, there was something generic or forgettable about their blandly mildly attractive or at least inoffensive features. Their skin was very smooth and unblemished, and again, from a human point of view at least, you might think they were all in their 20s, such was the uniform impression of being unsullied or untroubled by the tribulations of the universe. But this smooth conformity also made them instantly unmemorable. There was no one among them who might be described as striking or remarkable. 2 non-human features did stand out, however, albeit with equal intensity across all the chirpers present. They had wings! Gossamer fine and largely transparent, their polythene-like surfaces had a greenish tinge, but could be seen through except where veins, stronger supporting ribs, and some other odd marks stood out against this near-invisible background. These flight appendages, when fully extended, had spans as wide as the chirpers were tall. The second alien feature of note was more subtle. The tips of their noses were dark brown circles, no more than half a centimetre in diameter. These tiny discrete discs, as far as the Time Lords could tell at this distance, looked shinier than the rest of the skins of these creatures. In case anyone was worried or disturbed by the thought that these humanoid aliens were all naked, they were not. Although they were not exactly well dressed either. Much like their other features, their clothes were fairly generic, either light dresses or trousers and shirts, with no particular gender biases in either selection, but little intentional variation in styles. What variety there was seemed to exist solely in the haphazard way most were attached to their wearers' bodies. In common with the construction of their homes, the clothing of the chirpers also frequently looked unfinished, as if the maker had become distracted or bored before completion. As such, many flaps were held closed, or arms and legs fastened simply by knotting vines around the incomplete sections like pieces of string. Now the Doctor and Romana identified the source of their fecal assault and near miss. Squatting on a branch immediately above them, and now a few steps ahead of them, was a female chirper in a light summer dress. She had her back turned and her buttocks were currently exposed. She looked mortified or guilty, and yet this emotion did not seem directed towards the 2 Time Lords. She was surrounded by many other chirpers, who now began to whisper to each other behind their hands in slightly high-pitched voices. The Doctor and Romana caught 1 or 2 snatches of conversation.
She missed them.
They not covered.
That wasn't meant to happen.
Did she fail?
The chirper bombardier stood and turned to face the same way as her companions, or entourage. She looked agitated and worried by what she was hearing. She pouted her lips forward, looking almost like a duckbill, while opening her eyes wide as if amazed or surprised. This did not appear to have the desired effect, as the tone of the crowd's grumblings remained unaltered. Then she pointed fiercely in the direction of the two Time Lords.
Made them jump.
She cried imperiously.
They ran away. They scared.
She continued even more stridently. Further muttering broke out amongst her companions, only now coloured in tones of approval. The doctor leaned towards Romana and spoke behind his hand. You will recall I mentioned there was some debate as to the nature of chirper intelligence. Romana nodded slowly.
Yes, I remember.
She confirmed, regarding the elevated assembly with a far from warm expression. One of the followers nearest to the head chirper shuffled over to her. This new female leaned in towards the nearest wing of the ringleader. She gently touched the tip of her nose against it, then gave a little twitch of her head and withdrew. She had left a small brown mark on the transparent surface, like a lopsided V or a tick. The Gallifreyans noticed there were many more similar marks all over the chirper leader's wing surfaces. They also saw that all the chirpers had some of these marks, though none in such profusion as the glorious guano giver. More and more of her entourage crowded in to repeat this procedure, while the chirper who had first adorned their leader received one or two of her own, from others impressed by her own quick action. The lead chirper beamed with delight, and her whole body quivered in excitement at all the adulation showered upon her.
Their society seems to be some sort of popularity contest.
Romana noted sourly. The doctor waggled his head noncommittally. Well, perhaps, but it would hardly be unique in that regard, he observed. Romana shook her head wearily.
Unfortunately not,
she agreed. The two Time Lords continued their search for the Boloid mining camp, taking care to skirt the Chirper city, keeping their eyes peeled for further airborne attacks. This may have been why, with their attention so distracted, they both stumbled into a swamp. Side by side, both Time Lords now stood up to their knees in blue sludge. While they were only sinking slowly, they were undeniably sinking and stuck fast.
Well, this is another fine mess,
Romana noted with comedic satisfaction. Yes, the doctor agreed. What a fantastic colour! Romana rolled her eyes.
It's less the aesthetics which concern me, more our slow descent into drowning.
I see your point. We need to lie down. That should at least slow, possibly even prevent, our sinking further, the doctor advised. Neither were pleased at the prospect, but both knew it was the only sensible option left to them. They bent their knees and lay flat with their arms outstretched, squelching like well-dressed starfish.
So what now, Doctor?
Romana asked.
Can you reach any handy vines from where you are, to haul us to safety?
The doctor shook his now muddy head. Unfortunately, I've reached around quite extensively and messily, and can report no such lifelines. Romana squelched in return as she shook her own head despondently. Then she gave a gasp of alarm.
Doctor, look.
This final command was given with an awkward nod of her forehead across the swamp. With some effort, the doctor turned his gaze to follow her gesture. A sluggish V was rippling through the blue slurry, heading in their direction. While the wave of the disturbance might have been quite lugubrious, the tip of the V bubbled and frothed energetically and disturbingly. It was presumably the source of the wave and was making substantial progress towards them. Ooh, I wonder if it might be a snark, or even a Willeming Voom, the doctor mused curiously. Romana found her head shaking once again.
I think on this occasion I could quite happily live in ignorance.
The doctor nodded grimly, his chin slapping the swamp as he did so. Yes, I fear in this case it might indeed be easier to live that way. He reluctantly agreed. The azure slime in front of them erupted. Both Time Lords found themselves spitting cerulean globules from their mouths as they struggled to keep their airways free. They also blinked and wiped their eyes in desperate attempts to clear their vision. The sight thus revealed was remarkable indeed. Floating and bobbing on the surface of the mud like some shaggy 1.5-meter high beach ball was the unmistakable form of a boloid. In spite of having only just emerged from beneath the marsh, its aquamarine hair looked almost untouched by the muck of that same colour. The fur obviously repelled the swamp, and the Time Lords felt particularly envious of that most desirable property. The creature's two broad flat hands/feet rested on the gently rippling slurry to aid stability, while the arms joined the ball of its body roughly at, or even above, where ears might be expected. The alien's mouth formed a yellow protuberance from the centre of its face like a modest trumpet bell, while above this sat a pair of glowing circles, the creature's eyes.
The Doctor and his companion, I presume?
The boloid said gruffly.
Romana.
Romana supplied helpfully, if a little brusquely. The Doctor frowned at them both. My good sir, you have us at a disadvantage. Even more so now my companion has identified herself. Might I inquire how you knew who we were? The boloid gave a single harsh chuckle.
Ha! You're not exactly low profile. You're all over every news feed. And it's not like we're stuck in the bloody Stone Age out here. We do hear things, you know.
The Doctor inclined his head graciously. My apologies. I did not mean to imply any disrespect for your technological prowess. The boloids are, after all, famous for their engineering. But who, may I ask, do we have the honour of addressing? The shape of the boloid's mouth trumpet shifted slightly in what the Time Lords assumed was a smile.
I am Bimbo, Chief Representative of the Boloids of Alpha Centauri Prime, and welcome to the Noria Jungle Sludge Mine.
The Doctor and Romana looked amazed.
But you're the very person we've come to meet.
Romana cried. Did retired Ambassador Alpha Centauri contact you from the crash site? Warn you to expect us? The Doctor asked in confusion. Bimbo gave the boloid equivalent of a frown.
AC is here, then? No, we've heard no word from him. But there were reports of his weather station taking off and flying towards the jungle. Our seismometers registered an impact soon thereafter, so I came out to investigate in case my old friend was in trouble.
The Doctor's confusion looked far from dispelled. Wait, you call him AC? Bimbo laughed.
Well, of course I bloody well do. Have you any idea how confusing it is calling him Alpha Centauri? I've called him AC for years.
Romana narrowed her eyes significantly at the Doctor. Yes. I can see how this name might help a little. He conceded tetchily. Our mutual friend is here. He continued in a more businesslike tone. But injured in his crippled weather station. He sent us for help to find you. And it appears we have succeeded. Bimbo dipped his body forward in a nod.
Happens you have.
He agreed.
Come with me back to the mining settlement and we'll send a repair vehicle and crew to fetch him. And in the meantime, we can get you two cleaned up. There's a fairly solid path over yonder I can drag you both to. Then it's an easy walk from there. But why did AC want you to meet me in the first place?
The boloid waddled over between the two Time Lords, offering each an arm to hang on to. As the Doctor took a firm hold of their rescuer, he answered his question. AC wanted us to see the state of the boloid people. He said you were suffering greatly due to the mining demands of the Earthlings. Bimble's countenance fell.
Aye, that's a fair statement. Best wait till we get to the settlement itself before we talk about this. You might well see the problem then anyway, he said grimly.
With that, the boloid leader pulled the two Time Lords to firmer ground, and together the trio began to trudge deeper into the blue swamp. The Doctor and Romana both sat in floating cushioned hollow hemispheres inside the chrome building which formed Bimbo's official residence and offices. They were currently wrapped in large fluffy blankets of yellow and scarlet for modesty and warmth.
Your clothes should be clean and dry in about an hour,
Bimbo said, almost jovially. The Doctor nodded his understanding. We are much obliged to you, Representative Bimbo, he responded cordially. But in the meantime, perhaps you could tell us more of the problems of your people and their causes. The boloid leader shook his fur, almost like a dog drying himself.
You saw the state of the place as you arrived, didn't you?
He asked tersely. It was true that, as the two Time Lords had squelched wetly towards Bimbo's home, they had gained a worrying insight into the lives of the boloid miners and their families. The buildings of the town were all of modern materials and designs, in many respects not dissimilar to those of the Chittids, except they favoured more spherical shapes than the towers and cones and cuboids of their insectoid brethren. Another notable difference, however, had been the state of disrepair of most of the boloid constructions, as if wear and tear had been allowed to remain unaddressed. It was the first sign of any privation they had witnessed on Alpha Centauri Prime. Next they had reached the local hospital, where, even as they passed, several floating platform-like vehicles had rushed up carrying prostrate boloids, clearly in desperate need of medical attention. Still more sickly-looking furry balls queued outside, waiting for admittance. It was not immediately obvious what ailed these citizens, but their fur did look less shiny than, say, that of Bimbor. Their eyes also glowed less brightly, and while their spherical forms did not really allow them to look skinny, there was something about their expressions and a lack of energy which suggested they were malnourished, exhausted, or both.
Yes,
The doctor conceded in response to Bimbor's question.
things did look a little desperate as we came through the town. Why, given all the mining going on, and presumably the attendant wealth that would bring, are your people so impoverished?
Bimbor shook his body angrily.
It's those bloody humans!
He spat bitterly. Then he remembered his guests.
Oh, I didn't mean you. I'm not so daft as to think everyone of one race is the same, unlike our idiot Chittid comrades.
He finished sourly.
We're not actually human.
Romana pointed out. Bimbor's eyes widened in surprise.
Really?
He said thoughtfully.
Well, it's a damn shame nobody thought to tell the Chittids. Then maybe they wouldn't be so bloody keen to fulfill their every damn desire.
The doctor nodded pensively.
AC had already hinted as much. His glowing tales of my earlier adventures having inadvertently deified the entire population of the Earth. But your people do not share these beliefs. Surely you must object. Vote against harmful diktats favouring the well-being and enrichment of Earth at the expense of the boloids, or even ultimately the Chittids.
Bimbor sighed defeatedly.
It all comes down to numbers,
he said wearily.
You know the Chittids are long-lived, at least by earthly standards. Well, so are we, the boloids, barring accidents, and therein lies the problem.
The doctor and Romana nodded, urging him to continue.
My people have been proud miners of trisilicate for millennia, an open-cast but no less hazardous process, taking in the sludge from the swamp you fell in earlier and others like it.
Ah, said the doctor knowingly.
It is the trisilicate which gives it its distinctive blue colour, yes?
Bimbor's body bobbed in agreement.
Aye, and us too. You could say it's in our blood, 'cause it is. And like I said, we're proud of our heritage and live for the work, no matter how hazardous. But that has always meant we've had a slightly higher mortality rate than our more desk-bound Chittid compatriots. But didn't bother us. Yes, we were always outnumbered on the Alpha Centauri Senate due to proportional representation, but it didn't matter when our fellow Alpha Centaurans were sensible, practical, and looked out for the good of all.
The two Time Lords nodded thoughtfully.
So, how did earthly demands upset the balance?
Romana inquired. Bimbor shook his head.
Once they got wind of the Chittid's softness for them, coupled with their pre-existing frustration at being unable to get such a plentiful and relatively local supply of trisilicate, they leapt at the chance to take advantage of the situation. At least some in government and positions of power did. They started persuading the Chittids to vote for more and more mining, coupled with an increased export of the produce, while paying next to nothing for it by galactic trading standards. And it got worse. Even the money which was coming to Alpha Centauri Prime, which might have gone some way to improving the state of things for us boloids, was diverted. Pointless, frivolous expenses. Things the Senate were persuaded to buy from Earth, usually dressed up in some war-necessary pretense. And so you see us now, the land and the people, stripped bare and close to breaking.
Just then they heard a whining noise coming from outside, somewhere overhead.
Have they fixed AC's weather station?
The doctor asked.
Will he be joining us?
Bimbor shook his head grimly.
Not yet. Not for another hour, I'd say.
He muttered.
No, this will be the mining consultant from Earth, making a surprise inspection, no doubt. Mining consultant? Pah! Chittid puppet master, more like.
Both Romana and the doctor looked concerned.
Should we get out of sight?
Romana asked.
We don't want to make things awkward for you.
Bimbor struck up a defiant pose.
This is my home and my place of office. If he has any objections, I shall tell him where to stuff 'em.
Romana turned to the doctor.
Might it not be better for us if people didn't know we were here?
The doctor looked undecided. Perhaps. Then again, we might gain some useful information from the meeting. Still, we don't need to tell him who we are, if you get my drift. Romana nodded her understanding. The whining had subsided, and it was not long before there was a knock at the door. Bimbor pressed a button which opened it, and in strode the representative from Earth. He was a fairly average-looking human, mid-brown hair brushed back from his receding temples, a pointy beak of a nose, and a wiry frame. He wore a rubbery blue jacket which looked somehow simultaneously work-related, yet showy. The man was grinning in an oily fashion as he entered, but his expression froze as he saw the doctor and Romana. Then his grin broadened, and his eyes grew even more unctuous. "My dear Bimbor," he began, "I had no idea you had guests. I do hope my popping in isn't inconvenient." Bimbor glowered at him.
No more than usual, Mr. Sykes.
He responded gruffly.
And we rescued these two lost in the jungle. It seemed only humane.
Yes, indeed, the doctor chipped in. We are tourists, exploring the wonderful nature of this magnificent world, and unfortunately got a little lost, Mr. Sykes. Mr. Sykes' smile remained, but his eyes looked utterly cold. "Come, come, doctor, your fame precedes you. Even with a change, or absence, of clothes, your face and that of your companion are instantly recognizable. You are all over every news feed. There really is no need to be modest." The doctor and Romana shrugged to one another, knowing what cover they had was blown. "I must say," Mr. Sykes continued to them, "the manner of your arrival is quite ingenious. I mean, I'm surprised nobody tried it before. Mocking up a dropship to look like that of the fabled doctor, then passing yourself off as him, really, it's quite impressive. But I think you'll find you've made your play a little too late. I think you'll find the Chittids now associate all humans with those old tales, not just you, Doctor." The mining consultant's words dripped with irony and derision, utterly secure in his position to his mind. Meanwhile, Bimbor seethed with anger.
Just why are you here?
He demanded angrily.
Are you finally going to see your way to giving us the medical supplies we so desperately need? Or the mining safety equipment? Or the shift reductions?
Mr. Sykes patted the air in insincere placation. Now, Bimbor, I'm sure your government is spending its money wisely. After all, you are one of them, are you not? The boloid leader seethed once more, but before he could respond, his human tormentor ploughed on. "Which is actually why I'm here. I do hope you will attend tomorrow evening's special session of the Alpha Centauran Senate. We will be unveiling the latest wise purchase made by your people from EarthGov's high-tech defense sector. It is a large-scale scanner, specially designed to detect any infiltrators from Galaxy 5. This first purchase will be installed in the Senate main assembly hall itself as a proof of concept. But hopefully, many more will be procured in the near future and placed in all potentially sensitive locations, ports of entry, etc., throughout Alpha Centauri's sphere of influence." Bimbor raised his hands over his head and shook them in rage.
Another bloody waste of valuable resources, all while my people suffer and die. Another bloody vanity project, whose only purpose is to stuff the pockets of Earth.
Sykes shook his head slowly in reproval. "Now, Bimbor, you are quite entitled to make any suggestions or protests at the appropriate times, you know." With that, the human representative spun on his heels, waved at the door opener, which responded swiftly, and allowed him to make his exit. This left Bimbor quivering with rage, watched by a concerned Romana and the doctor.
I can see now why AC wanted us to see the lie of the land.
Unintended as this was by both myself and AC, I see now we are the unwitting accomplices in a most callous and destructive con job," the doctor said, his eyes staring through the floor. They then snapped up to meet Bimbor's glowing own. "I assume you and AC will be attending this unveiling." Bimbor looked surprised.
Well, yes, I suppose I have to. And as a retired dignitary, it would be easy for me to get a pass for AC. Would I be right in thinking I'll need 2 more guest passes?
The doctor nodded firmly. "I suppose our fame should make that easy enough as well. Slightly more problematic, we need something else up on stage with us, although again, fame may aid us." Bimbor nodded with some excitement now, and the 2 Time Lords gathered close to him to discuss their plans. The Senate building of Alpha Centauri Prime, naturally housed in City Alpha 1, was a vast metal cylindrical tower topped by a giant sphere, the perfect union of chitted and boloid architectural styles. It was the elevated metal globe which encased the main conference room itself. Inside, there was rank upon rank of seats surrounding a circular stage at floor level. This stage slowly rotated so that everyone seated in the round auditorium would get a good view of the main speakers, at least for some of the time. On the revolving platform were chairs and desks for the primary participants and most honoured guests, as might be expected, but these had been joined by 2 more unusual items. The first, and most obvious due to its size, was a huge gunmetal grey ring, 20 metres in diameter, but largely empty, the actual ring being only perhaps a foot wide. This was supported on a cuboid plinth, 1/2 metre by 1/2 metre in cross-section, but 10 metres long. It was fortunate this room had such a high ceiling, as the device dwarfed all around it, including the second odd addition. That was the TARDIS. Overshadowed as it might have been, it was no less noteworthy and gained its fair share of stares and conversation from the gathering audience. At one of the tables on stage stood Bimbor, AC, the Doctor, and Romana. Other important persons sat at other settings, including Mr. Sykes of Earth. The Doctor walked over to the TARDIS, and seeing this, the mining consultant got up and bustled over to join him there. "Thinking of blasting off, are we?" Sykes asked with a watery smile and a slight sneer as the Doctor opened the door. "I wouldn't blame you. I admire a good con as much as the next man, but I think you're outclassed here," he concluded. The Doctor paused and turned to regard the human with a steely stare. "I was simply going to acquire a change of clothes," he said, lifting his foot to reveal an exposed sock. While the boloids had successfully cleaned the swamp from the Doctor and Romana's outfits, they had been unable to supply a replacement boot, particularly given that item was useless to them. Mr. Sykes waved his hand expansively towards the TARDIS doors with mocking politeness. The Doctor stared at him coldly for a moment longer before entering the blue box and shutting the door behind him. One door opened a minute later, and the Doctor emerged looking exactly as he had before, only this time with both feet encased in DMs. K9's nose poked through the opening. "K9," the Doctor barked sternly. "Stay inside the TARDIS."
As instructed, Master.
K9 chirped obediently before withdrawing his head. The Doctor shut the door on him, then returned to stand with Romana, AC, and Bimbor. Evidently, all attendees were now present as the Speaker of the Senate called the meeting to order. He then surrendered the floor to Mr. Sykes. "Greetings, my illustrious Alpha Centauran friends," he began grandly. "And let me start by congratulating you on making the wise purchase you see before you now." The chitted members gave scattered clacking rounds of applause and high-pitched fluting murmurs of approval. The smaller boloid contingent gave far lower grumbles of disapproval. Sykes ignored any displeasure in the crowd and played to the satisfied representatives. "This scanner will detect any would-be spies from Galaxy 5, he pronounced proudly, while giving the all-clear to every good, honest, chitted, boloid, human, indeed all upstanding citizens of the Galactic Federation." This received a longer, louder response than his opening statement, and, while just as mixed, by dint of numbers, the approval largely drowned out any protests. "And I know you will all heed the wisdom of your human friends, dare I say, saviours? and purchase many, many more. A further wave of noise erupted from the audience. The Doctor and Romana chose that moment to stand up and walk over to the smug human basking in the applause. Mr. Sykes raised his eyebrows in sceptical amusement at his uninvited guests. He bent discreetly towards them. "Seeking to steal the show, are we?" he asked good-naturedly. "Well, we're all on the same team after all, aren't we? I'm sure there'll be no irreconcilable divine schisms between us." This final statement was made with a teasing wink. The Doctor raised his hands to address the crowd. "Respected delegates," he began seriously, "you all know who I am." From all over the auditorium, cries of
"The Saviour! The Saviour! The Saviour! The Saviour!"
rang out. The Doctor shook his head impatiently. "I am the Doctor, and you do not need to blindly accept what I say, or indeed follow the diktats of Mr. Sykes here or any other humans." This did not quite have the effect the Doctor had been hoping for. Several shouts squeaked out from the chittids present, several phrases oft repeated.
"Earth is our friend. The Earth people only seek to help us. The planet of the Saviour brings salvation. The Doctor is the Saviour."
Mr. Sykes leaned in towards the Doctor once more. "It seems your divine influence has been shared amongst all your people. Before you think about mounting a hostile takeover, consider that I have numbers on my side, both here and at home." He whispered warningly, but still amused. The Doctor raised his hands once more to quiet the crowd. "Listen! Listen! You must see what is happening to your world. You chittids cannot be blind to the state of your boloid brothers. You don't have to toe the party line. You must think for yourselves. You're all individuals."
"Yes,
the audience intoned back.
we're all individuals." "I'm not,"
A lone chitted voice added.
We're not even human.
Romana cried impatiently and with mounting frustration. Mr. Sykes shook his head, smiling sadly. "Just watch this," he murmured to the two Time Lords.
"Only the Saviour would deny his divinity."
A strident, chitted voice sang out.
"Or his companion."
Another added helpfully. "You see," Sykes yelled cheerfully, "we're all just your modest, happy human helpers. K9, now!" The Doctor suddenly shouted.
"Master?"
K9's voice rang out from the TARDIS speakers. At that same moment, the giant circle of the security scanner roared into life. It looked almost like water flowing in defiance of gravity, rushing from the metal ring through empty air towards its centre. Here, this silvery energy wave met and crashed outwards a little over the heads of the speakers on stage before sinking back. This impossible-seeming vertical wall of water eventually settled and became flat, then began to project an image. The Doctor, Romana and Mr. Sykes were all standing directly in front of this rippling screen. Behind them it showed the trio once more, only now magnified to 3 times their true heights, and also with their internal organs on full display like some giant MRI. There was an obvious difference between the two Time Lords and the human next to them. Their twin hearts could clearly be seen pulsing away, in stark contrast to Mr. Sykes' cold singular pump. This difference, and more besides, must have been just as obvious to the scanning device. It surrounded the two Time Lords' images in red and superimposed a bell icon of the same colour over their heads and began a raucous blaring alarm. "K9!" the Doctor yelled. "Can you turn that down a bit?"
"Affirmative, Master."
K9's voice piped up decisively, amplified through the TARDIS's sound system. The red outline and alarm bell emoji remained on the giant screen, but the noise itself dwindled to become almost inaudible. Romana swung an arm up to encompass the screen behind them.
Look,
She cried.
God and dog might share some superficial similarities, but how they are put together is rather important.
The Doctor looked a little pained by this analogy. "Really, Romana, did you have to do the whole dog-god thing? It reminds me of something a far more egomaniacal Time Lord of my acquaintance once said." He grumbled quietly with a frown. Romana cocked her head at him.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Was it the Master by any chance?
The doctor waggled his cranium noncommittally. More or less, he replied. Romana then waved her hand again to the scanner.
People of Alpha Centauri Prime, look at what your eyes are telling you. The Doctor and I are not of Earth, not even from the Galactic Federation. We have no more in common with Mr. Sykes or any other human than we do with a chirpa.
A disturbed muttering broke out in the crowd. Oh yes, Romana, the doctor said approvingly. That was much better. The muttering had grown to angry, high-pitched, chitted shouting. A scrunched-up ball of papery-looking substance sailed through the air to land on the floor near the Earth representative. Mr. Sykes flinched, then looked quite panicked when another bounced off his head as still more began to fly in his direction. The chittids were screwing up their programs and name cards and throwing them at the Earthmen in disgust. Meanwhile, the boloids were chuckling and nudging each other while copying the chittids' actions, mostly just for fun, mixed with a little vengeance. The Doctor and Romana backed away from the flinching human in the direction of the TARDIS. At the doors of the blue box they found AC waiting for them.
Doctor, what's happening?
Romana asked. The Doctor looked simultaneously concerned, yet pleased. The chittids are a very non-confrontational people. By their standards, this is a riot. AC giggled.
I don't think my people will be taking any more help from the humans, and I imagine our Senate will return to one in which the boloids may be equally proud.
With this he took the Doctor's hand in his upper claws.
While it seems you may have convinced my people you are not the saviour,
He began with a smile to his voice.
you have, after all that, saved the day.
The Doctor smiled and shook his old friend's upper limbs. Bimbor then shook the Doctor's hand with a mighty one of his own, while Romana received the same treatments from both. Then, with polite bows to the chittid and the boloid, the two Time Lords both entered the TARDIS. Standing now at the main console, K9 at their feet, Romana turned to the Doctor.
What do you think AC will do now? Do you think he'll go back to watching the weather?
She asked curiously. The Doctor gave a sly smile and shook his head. I feel certain that AC's recent adventures have regenerated the chittid hero. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he returned to galactic diplomacy. Romana pursed her lips at the Doctor.
Wouldn't be surprised, eh? More than a feeling, I'll bet, Doctor.
She said with a twinkle in her eye. Oh, you know, time is such a tricky thing. He replied with a twisted smile of his own. Romana shook her head indulgently.
So, where to now, Doctor? After all, we do have the whole of time and space ahead of us.
She asked cheerfully. The Doctor spread his arms wide to encompass the expanse of the main console before them. Indeed we do. So let's spin the wheel and see where we land. With that, he threw the launch lever.
Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, masters, mistresses.